started. I'm sure there's always some trailing in, but first of all, just hello and welcome. We're really, pleased with the numbers that came out tonight, and obviously, this is a topic that is really passionate to me, and I'm really happy to have Julie with me to do this. It's something that we have seen, the need for this information to be put out there has just been growing each year. And so we want to just help equip you guys with the understanding of the multifaceted mind of the athlete and how that has been evolving over time. So either I was really successful at being a bug in everybody's ear, or you also see the value in this. I will say I am used to high school students in May. So you know where I'm going with this? It's like you can remind someone every single day of the same thing, and then come the next day, they're like, "What? I have no recollection of anything you just said." So we were, strong-willed in trying to get everybody out here for this. So thank you for coming. It is certainly a busy season, and for all of us. So it's going to be a great night.
Okay, so why do we do this? Well, whether you're a parent or a coach or a mentor, as you know, the picture up there gives a great example of how we pour into our young people. I know as a parent, I feel this way, that we're literally giving of ourselves on a regular basis. And coaches often feel this way too, highly invested, hopefully, in helping our athletes be the best they are. And also being aware that it requires a great deal. Not just of their skills and abilities, but even where they're at spiritually and emotionally and socially.
So we do want to just kind of introduce ourselves officially so that you guys know what our roles here are as well. So I am Dr. Chrissy Rickard, aka Coach Rickard, aka the sports side of this talk tonight. And I've been a PT for 20 years now. Actually, this month is 20 years. So Julie, I think I just may have let the cat out of the bag and may have given away my age, because again, high school
Started when
students.
she was 4 years old.
High school students are like, "Oh, Coach Rickard, how old are you?" I'm like, "I don't know. How old do you think I am?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know, like 30." I'm like, "Yep, that's right." And practicing for 20 years, I have a 16-year-old. Yeah, do the math. That's about right. So again, I spend a lot of time with them. But so I have my bachelor's degree in psychobiology from Arcadia University and a doctorate of physical therapy from Arcadia University. I am the director of sports medicine and fitness here at FCA and team physical therapist. And I do have my own sports performance business on the side, so hop on over to my website if you want to see what's happening for the summer. So as I said, I do spend a lot of time with our student athletes, maybe more than you even realize. As a matter of fact, I was just figuring I saw about 250 treatment sessions just since January. So that doesn't include our busy season, which is the fall. That is when we have the most sports going on at one time. So, I spend a lot of time with them. For those of you who don't know, I have my setup in the weight room, and usually 8th hour is when student athletes will come in to see me. Sometimes before that, to get evaluated or assessed, treated, taped up, ready to go for pregame or whatever that might be. So last Friday was one of those really busy days where I probably saw like 10 students within about a 30 to 45 minute time period. So it was like bam, 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 let's go. And it's like I'm hustling through. And I paused for a second. I was like, I can only imagine like what parents might think as I drive up to the softball game in my little golf cart and have a little snack and like watch the game. And they're probably like, "Man, this is like a sweet deal. Like she just gets to watch sports all day long and every day." But it's really a lot that does go behind it, and a lot of athletes that do come to see me for a lot of different things. And so, all that hustle and bustle and getting them game ready, getting them out on the field, is just about perspective. Because you think about coming up to a game and how there's so many moving parts behind what makes each of our sporting events go smoothly, behind the scheduling and the athletic department working together and getting everything ready to go with officials. And you think about the coaches and the time that they put into training with their teams and working to get to that point, to that game ready. And so it's just about perspective, because there are a lot of layers a lot of layers behind what each athlete is actually going through. And so that is really a big focus on tonight, is just to help understand really just what those layers and how deep they go and what it takes to look and see, you know, the pitcher that's throwing cool and collected, doing an awesome job in their game, but maybe not realizing what all is really going on in their life and in their head. So, you know, it's just perspective on what to look at tonight. So I just want to introduce Julie. So this is a typical day for Julie. This is probably a smaller size crowd than what she's used to. So she travels the globe, and she talks and does a lot of biblical counseling and conferences, and let's just say she's legit. So another day for Julie, me, not so much. But so I just want to introduce you, and I'm happy to have Julie talk a little bit about herself.
Well, tonight I'm Chrissy's sidekick. She's the star of the show, but I've got about 25 years of professional counseling experience. Certainly worked with a lot of athletes on both the college level, a few are professional, and a lot of teens who will struggle with the pressures of athleticism, getting into college, things like that, especially think of swimming. It's one of those places where your ability to place to go into high-level athleticism, to get into college scholarships, how that can sometimes boil down to less than a second for a student, the kind of pressure that puts on, and the kind of anxiety it can produce, and all the things that trickle with that. So you can see how mental health issues and the struggles with being an athlete or good conditioning, they really blend together quite naturally, and the need to respond well to them. So that said, one of the things Chrissy didn't say, that I'm going to put her on the spot, is maybe what would be helpful too for parents to know is, what do you do, what don't you do? So it's easy to say, oh, Mrs. Rickert's here. What are things you actually are supposed to do in your role here? And what are things that don't fall maybe within your role?
Yeah, and I think as we get into a lot of tonight and what my role is, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Certainly when I see someone come in, you know, do their evaluation, their assessment, their treatment, you know, determine what the impairments are, determine what the diagnosis might be, the functional limitations, those types of things, comprise an exercise program, and to be able to determine, you know, what exercises are going to help to rehab them, depending on what their injury is, and then hopefully get them back to play. But another big part is going to be my role here, and in order to recognize and refer if there are any concerns mental health issue-wise, because that's outside of my realm and my practice, but I can be a first line of defense in doing that.
Yeah, let me jump in and just give you guys a few examples too. I mean, many of you guys have seen in the sports world people who have stepped out of sports, for example, gymnastics, right? Where they've stepped out of sports for mental health reasons, where they've said the pressures, the anxiety, whatever the emotional things are going on in their world has prohibited them from really being able to focus well in their sports. We're seeing that now in many industries and many career paths of people stepping down. What's been on the news lately? I'm drawing a blank on Miss USA and Miss Teen USA, and how there is a focus on mental health in some ways, in really good ways. But it also points to when we're not dealing with the important issues, how it impacts young people's ability to really function well in the path that they're taking. So that said, let's hear from some athletes. You're going to see some quotes tonight that we've pulled out of athletes who validate some of these things. So here's Jesse Owens saying, in the end, it's extra effort that separates a winner from second place. But winning takes a lot more than that too. It starts with complete command of the fundamentals. It takes desire, determination, discipline, and self-sacrifice. And finally, it takes a great deal of love, fairness, respect for your fellow man. Put all those together, and even if you don't win, how can you lose? Which is why, especially here at FCA, we do care a lot more about just the skill level in young people. We care about where they're at spiritually. We care about where they're at emotionally and socially as well. All right.
And so with that, the spiritual aspect is really important. And I think that was one of the things that actually really pushed me to even start the conversation with this seminar is I felt like God called, and when God calls, you answer. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I wanna start by really kind of defining sports psychology, really what that is. And so really I'm just gonna read this off because it pretty much encapsulates what the whole program, or what it kind of deals with. So sports psychology is a study of how psychological factors influence sports, athletic performance, exercise, and physical activity. It looks at how physical activity and mental well-being intersect and its impact on performance. Utilizing psychology, athletes can actually maintain high levels of performance by prioritizing mental fitness. And research on ideal conditions for optimal performance examines topics such as mental health, mental toughness, confidence, self-esteem, motivation, and perfectionism. And mental health concerns are certainly rising. So first, I know there's a lot of students, athletes in the audience, which is awesome. If you guys have any interest in sports psychology, I assume you have interest in sports, so check that off. But if you have any interest in sports psychology, I highly encourage you to look more into this as a career option, as a profession, because I will guarantee you that in the next 5 to 10 years, this field is going to be exploding. Okay, they are already hiring sports psychologists on almost every level of the college level, but I'm seeing there's going to be a drastic need as time goes on. So just think about that. So this definition really showcases the dynamics of what we really want to talk about tonight. And so we look at both the clinical implications and the performance side of things. So on the next slide, there's a couple statistics, okay? So approximately 1/3 of athletes experience moderate to extreme stress and wanted help, but did not receive it. This was a study done in 2015. Now the big question when you read that is why? Why didn't they get the help? And so you can see that 65% have a fear of failure, 66% have self-pressure, 45% have fear of judgment, 35% have impractical expectations, and 34% is from coach pressure. So statistics have just been overwhelming over this time period, and even though this study was done in 2015, I would tell you that the research that's going to be coming out in the next few years, these numbers are going to be astronomically higher. It's definitely something that we want to get ahead of, so that before it becomes an issue, before it affects the athlete's mindset, before it affects their performance, we want to be able to recognize this and be able to get the right resources to help them.
Yeah, there's a lot of research actually out there right now. Well, as we know, you can Google almost anything. So if you're doubting anything we're saying tonight, go home and Google it, and you'll find probably worse statistics. We're being pretty moderate in what we say. So even this is back from 2015 you said? You think what's happened since COVID? I mean, COVID has escalated emotional struggles for many people, not just athletes, right? So doesn't it make sense how it's going to impact our students? Not to mention we live in a very precarious world that wants to say we're safe but not safe. And what a confusing message for young people. Think of airports. We're safe, but we're not safe. We have bomb-sniffing dogs, we have metal detectors, we have all these things going on. Think of public schools, or even many schools today where you have locked doors and intruder drills and all the things we have that we are just by nature of the society our young people are growing up in, there's more anxiety and stress. And then you add on to that the natural things that go with that, like sports and academics and all the normal pressures. Then let's add on to it social media, which adds a whole nother level. And so one of the things we'll talk about later as well is there are websites that exist out there for coaches that can come up with social media contracts for their athletes. Why? Because they're understanding that social media has a lot to play in this, about whether it creates drama on teams, on whether it creates more anxiety, on how your character is reflected in social media. So again, these are secular sources out there that are already taking it to another level because they're understanding what you're going to hear us say today.
So Julie, would you mind going over some of the risk factors for mental health concerns that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you guys can read what's up here, so let me think what I'd add on to it. You have the exhaustion, right? So especially kids at this age and stage, they're growing. but they need more sleep, they get less sleep. Think how technology plays into this, right? So kids are busy all day long at school, they have homework, they have tests to study for. They come home, they have sports, they have practice, they have games. Then they come home, and if they get their homework done, how many of you all let your kids have their electronics in their room at night? Now, forget whether that's a good idea or not, just think how much that interrupts sleep. There are tons of studies out there that say the worst thing you could do is have electronics by your bed at night. Why? Because the constant sound, the constant noise, even just the light and how that affects REM sleep, all kinds of stuff out there that demonstrates how that impacts. And we know sleep is one of the primary things your body needs to recover. Tons of studies out there that tell you how sleep is so important for athletes as well. And when you don't get sleep, it leads to these things you see on the screen, things like burnout, lack of preparation, ability, cognitive delays, all kinds of things like that. Then you have, depending on the sport, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. Then you have, depending on the sport, the kind of pressures it brings up, like body image issues, or for things like weightlifting and opposite body image issues. There's anorexia. There's something called bigorexia out there that talks about the struggle of guys, bodybuilders or weightlifters who want to get big at the expense of taking steroids and doing all kinds of things that are unhealthy for your body. So you can see the whole gamut that an athlete can run. Depending on what your student does or what you coach, you've got to think, what are some of the possible struggles kids in this sport may struggle with? And as a coach or a parent, just be aware that it's out there. And be aware that even though you think your son or daughter might not struggle with it, they likely have peers and friends who are, if they're not as well, which creates a temptation that if they're really going to meet that high level athletic ability, they should be doing the very unhealthy things that their peers are doing. Thank you.
So when I look at this slide, Julie touches upon a lot of the things that she might see as some of the student athletes come to see her. And when I look at this, I will tell you that I see a lot of stress, specifically from some of our athletes here, that affects their game and their play as a result of stuff going on at home. So family relationships is a big one. The demands of their schedule, I would say, is a good one, top one for them. And also lack of playing time, that definitely comes into play and can kind of kickstart some other kind of mental health concerns along the way as they are stressed for those different reasons. And we're going to go into some of these as well. So, we explained kind of the introduction here on really why this talk is important tonight. Okay, so there's a lot of risk factors, there's a lot of statistics that are concerning, and as we go through it, we're going to talk a little bit more some other statistics as we get through the night. But so that's why when we approach this topic, it's actually really important to consider two sides of it. So, you have the clinical side, okay? So that is where the counseling is necessary, the treatment and the coping strategies and those types of things which are necessary for those who do have some sort of mental health, disorder that might be diagnosed or undiagnosed, but clinically relevant, that, when it becomes a problem where it is actually impeding their performance as an athlete, it certainly needs more care, more treatment, more concern. But those things are probably not too surprising for most of you because you probably think of those topics as, a big one, anxiety and depression, and certainly all those other things we talked about in terms of risk factors. They're definitely like the psychology that people think about, right? But what I think is really important about bringing this to you all in information is actually the flip side of that. So, which is the optimization of performance. And so what that is how you can utilize psychology to your advantage as an athlete to actually optimize your performance, to actually really take you to the next level. And that is where it gets pretty interesting in terms of what I see and can actually help with. So Julie's going to actually go into the clinical side a little bit more with some more statistics that would warrant why early recognition and treatment is so important.
So I love Proverbs here where it says, the purposes of a man's heart are like deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. What does that have to do with sports and psychology? Well, it speaks to both whether you're a parent, whether you're a coach, whether you're an athlete, the understanding what's going on underneath the surface and being wise to understand what's motivating, both what's motivating maybe to students or what's motivating their behavior to act the way they are, to struggle the way they are as well. So the skill, the winsomeness, is that we see beyond just the outward appearance or the outward behavior, but that we're also understanding what's going on, why maybe a student or an athlete is unmotivated, or what they need to be better motivated, what works in helping them. So the most common struggles you see up here are obviously what you've heard us talk about, the anxiety, the depression, self-image, body image issues, identity, things like that. Body dysmorphia is a huge one, especially among girls and athlete in sports, but it's also on a rise for guys as well. What used to be primarily a female issue, we are now seeing a lot of young men struggle with this as well. The high stakes pressure for success, scholarships to get into colleges or the right colleges, that plays into it a lot. So, screening, there is a lot of resources out there for coaches to help identify struggles. Sometimes it's not doing actual professional screenings, it's more going back to the passage in Proverbs, just paying attention. Just saying, I'm noticing changes in the students. Or when you know your athletes well, you know it's normal. You begin to think what's abnormal. Again, if you're a parent or somebody working in a particular sport, it's really wise to stop and think, what are the typical struggles guys playing baseball might struggle with, or with soccer, or with wrestling, or whatever it might be. Or what about girls? What about girls playing volleyball? What are the typical struggles we see in that sport? And just having a mindset that says, I'm going to be aware of these things. I'm going to be looking for, how do the girls talk about this in the locker room? How do they talk about it on the bus? Do I see any of these particular struggles happening? And so it's having that mindset that you're always paying attention to where they might be struggling. And if you're an athlete, it's paying attention to that yourself. What are the pressures you feel? What are the pressures you see with the people around you, your peers? And how can you bring that to light to coaches in ways that would be really helpful? All right. Again, more statistics. You don't need me to read them to you, but I think it's good to take a minute and look over the statistics and think about what they mean. How is it possible that 35% of elite athletes suffer from a mental health crisis? And again, we're seeing that in the news taking place right before our eyes. 30% of student athletes have reported feeling overwhelmed. Approximately 33% of NCAA men experience depressive symptoms and anxiety. So keep going down the list, and what we're seeing is that it is going on a regular basis. And people are talking about it more. We're seeing that happening where athletes are talking about the pressures they feel. Imagine, though, if we're starting here on the high school level to deal with those things well. Will we have the same kind of athletes 10 years from now? Which is why these kind of conversations are so important to have. Tonight's conversation isn't a one and done conversation, it's just getting the conversation started and bringing to light what's really important to happen so that this generation doesn't grow up to be on the news saying that they wish they had people helping them. Unfortunately, as well, abuse runs rampant in a lot of athletes and a lot of sports. Again, the abuse from coaches, the abuse that happens, whether it's verbal or physical or sexual abuse, it's all over the news. You don't need me to point out the statistics for that either. To be able to say that we've got to raise a generation of young people who have both integrity, who have high motivation, and what Christy's going to bring that is so important goes to the how do we teach them to be able to deal with the struggles, or I was just going to say earlier, be able to put them aside and be able to really focus and be motivated in all the right, healthy ways. All right, a couple of more examples. You can Google this, they're up on the websites. As many as 15% of NFL players exhibit depressive symptoms days after a concussion. What does that tell us? And by the way, there is actually going to be a QR code at the end of this that you can scan if you want any of the PowerPoint or notes. So that'll be available.
I knew I forgot something.
What?
I knew I forgot something.
Yeah, we get there.
No, to mention that.
68.6% of athletes exhibit signs of anxiety and 68% show signs of depression. So how is it possible then, if that statistic is accurate, how is it possible that all the teams here at FCA might not be struggling to some degree with that as well, right? What do we do about that? Well, one of the things we do is we bring it to light. We start talking about it. Student athletes who are injured are twice as likely to experience depression. Why might that be? Well, we could probably all guess why. What do we do about it? We begin talking about it. We become aware that if we have athletes with significant injuries and it's impeding their ability to play, what are good questions we need to be asking? What are ways we need to be helping talk to them about that? So what does it look like to recognize a struggling athlete? Here's some examples, and there's probably many more. Some are the decline in performance, obviously. Reduced involvement or absence, they slowly decline in their participation, they skip practices, maybe they talk about being afraid or don't want to play a game because of their fear of getting injured again. Problems focusing, concentrating, intense emotions or reactions or overreactions perhaps. Increased irritability during games or practices or with each other. Stressful circumstances. Here's what Chrissy said earlier, home life can deeply impact an athlete's ability to focus, whether it's in school or on the field. Social life. Things like relationships or broken relationships, bullying. That's a big word we throw out today. Sometimes I think we overuse it. Sometimes I don't think we accurately label it. And understanding how that can impact athletes. Excessive social media use and addiction. Why would that be in here? It's highly distracting. It prevents them from being all in on the very things that they need to be focused on because their mind is 20 other places, or waiting to see what's going to be said about them on social media, or will that picture get a like, and it becomes addictive, which means then it's going to take them away from the things that are priorities. So declining academics and interest in school. All right, so maybe you guys are thinking, well, that describes everybody in this room and probably everybody in the school. And to some degree, we need to ask that question. But here's what I think we need to be concerned about it. There are three factors: the frequency of it happening, the duration, and the intensity. So what do I mean? How frequent are these things happening? Everybody misses a practice once in a while. Everybody has a frustrating day or a bad moment. When should I be concerned? Well, how frequent is that happening? How long does it last, the duration? Does it last for minutes, hours, days? So the duration of it, and then the intensity. How over the top are the emotions? How over the top are the reactions? And then you put those three together. That's often true when something becomes a counseling or a need for professional help, is when it begins to impede day-to-day functioning, when it impedes these factors, when they're happening more frequent, they're lasting longer, and they're more intense. How to help? Well, as you see in the box, first, we're just saying pay attention. Notice the things that could be happening. And be willing to ask good questions, draw out students to find out what's going on. Simple questions like, you look like you're having a rough day, what's happening? What happened in school today? What happened in the game? Why are you so frustrated? Just asking them and getting them to begin talking. Being honest about what you observe, being approachable and non-threatening, So it's really easy, especially when somebody's acting out, to just want to put them in their place. And maybe there's a place for that time. But there's also a place to draw them out and to find out what's going on. You get somebody who feels heard and understood. Are they going to perform better for you? Are they going to engage better with you? Absolutely. Let them know that you care and are concerned for them personally. Encourage them to talk and open up. And know your resources. You don't need to be the expert at these things. So being surrounded by really good resources, whether they're things like what Chrissy does here, whether they're things like what a counselor does, whether, I don't know, I can think of all kinds of examples. It depends what the struggle might be. But just having resources for professionals who can help when it rises to the level of needing a professional. And it doesn't always rise to the level. Some of these things are day-to-day life and stresses that we want to teach our young people to deal with, right? And so the wisdom is knowing how you can help them and when they will work through it themselves and when you need to get additional help. So that leads into the overlap with that in performance.
Okay, so that's where I come in. So my role as a physical therapist, as I had alluded before, is evaluating the injury, assessing the overall impairment or dysfunction, being able to rehab, get the exercise they need to get them back, return to play, planning, that sort of thing. Because ultimately, I'm on the same team. I want them on the field just as much as they want to be on, just as much as our coaches want to be on. I don't want to keep them away from that. And so the other primary role would be then the emergency response for the injured athlete sideline for all of our events. But ultimately, when we talk about this topic tonight, my role in this is really to be able to recognize when there's a concern and be able to refer them to the professional help that they may need, whether it's counseling. And we have such an amazing group of resources here between Julie and Pastor Ron and other pastors on staff that can really help in this area. So being able to identify that is something that I do have training in my education to be able to look and identify when there's something more psychosocial or psychological in concern versus just physical in nature. And so, like I said, I spend a lot of time with your athletes. And so, providing them the safe atmosphere and creating connections and relationships with good rapport with them help me to identify when something just doesn't seem right. And they often will open up to me about things, and that leads me, as well as coaches, as the first line of defense to be able to identify these risks and get the help and recognition that they need. So I'm going to go through some of these things that are kind of like the pivot points, the main ideas behind this. So the first is overcoming injury and maximizing performance, focus and concentration, talking about routines and self-talk and perfectionism, managing expectations, and the prevention strategies. So first, on the next slide, we're going to go into the overcoming injuries. So an athlete has an injury, they come in, I evaluate, I assess, treat, tape them, whatever. That's what always everybody thinks. You just tape everything. It doesn't matter. You just throw tape on it. It's good.
Duct tape
whatever.
works.
And that's fine. Just tape it up, Coach Ritter. Okay. Your leg's hanging off, but we'll just tape it. But anyway, so identify the impairment, dysfunction, and then, they jump back into the game, right? All right. So maybe not always, though. So there could be obstacles in this. And so the obstacles are that, first of all, every athlete has a different response to injury. So there's a big spectrum of, physical toughness, okay, or mental toughness in this. And so that comes into the play. But there is...
Jump in with that?
Yeah.
Because that's really important, what she's saying there, mental toughness. So we don't want to cater to weakness. We don't want to create weak athletes. When we talk about mental health and emotions, we're not... Let's get warm and fuzzy and I'll hold hands.
I'm definitely not warm and fuzzy. Any athlete that has come to me, listen, I usually say, suck it up, buttercup, let's go.
So, talking about mental health doesn't mean that we ignore that there really is a need for mental toughness, that teaching good motivation and working through hardship and stress pressure is really important for an athlete. So I didn't want to minimize that. I think those two go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not minimizing that by any means. So, So if you think about the next couple, right? So the fear of returning to play, or fear of re-injury. So this is huge. So let's use the example of somebody who tore their ACL. Okay, so this is a common thing. Most people have heard of this. Most people have an idea generally on what that means. It means a pretty traumatic event, pretty traumatic injury, and it means a whole heck of a lot of rehab that usually can take, anywhere from 8 to 12 months, depending. So it's tough. And so when somebody is trying to come back, it leads to a lot of mental obstacles, and the fear is real. Going through that, and a lot of times, not a lot, I don't want to scare anybody who's had it, but it can happen again on the other side. There's no foolproof. The best way is to just be confident in doing the full rehab, get strong, get stabilization, and that will help physically, emotionally, and also the confidence level to return. But fear of not achieving the same level of play when you come back is also, so you can take somebody who has had an injury like this that may have been, the starter on their team, and what are they feeling or fearing, and are they going to be able to do the same thing? Are they going to lose their spot? So this is a real mental battle. The other thing is the importance of an athlete not missing practice when they're injured. So that doesn't mean they're participating in practice. That means not missing and being present in practice. So I always try to, encourage them, if you need to do rehab, if you need to do your exercise, whatnot, great, do it before. Don't miss practice, because being there present and being present with your team helps to really minimize them feeling that isolation and when they lose kind of that identity of being with the team. So it's really important. So coaches, that's what, to expect. That's something that they should still be there, recovering from whatever it might be. And, obviously we'll make sure that it's physically safe, but just to consider that. And then, certainly the pressure to return too soon. That those pressures can come from a lot of different sources, but I think that's where the trust comes into play in terms of, my overall assessment with them and having the trust that, believe me, I'm trying to get them back as soon as possible, just the same. Another big thing, is the
Can I stop you
athletes.
there for a second? That, just what Christy's saying is really important, because that's where parents and coaches and someone like Christy can work together to help make an assessment of how do we get the student back into the game, what's a good time frame, what's a healthy amount of rehab to take place, right?
Absolutely. So expectations are definitely part of the whole process, and always making sure the athlete is aware of what those expectations are, and what the plan is, and the communication between all those variables, between parents and coaches, is super important. The last thing in overcoming injury has a lot to do with their identity. So a lot of athletes put everything in to their sport, which means they have their identity in their sport. And that's not necessarily a good thing, okay? Because what happens is that it really provides more of a foundation that's unstable for them, and versus having their identity in Christ. And so we do put that first. We make sure that if we can help them identify as a child of God, that their role in that can be not based on their circumstances. It will help them instill more of the faith in that God's plan is His plan, and so it helps to get them, work through that.
A couple ways to say that as well is, from a counseling perspective, as I often say, this isn't your identity, it's part of your story. Or it's not your identity, it's part of how God's wired you, though. And if God's wired you and gifted you in this, then you've got to trust that He's going to use it, or even use your failures or your weaknesses or your struggles in it, but it shouldn't be what defines who you are as a person.
And I think every time an athlete can overcome an obstacle, it just gives them more strength, not only in their faith, because God's always there with you to get through there, but it also gives them more of an internal motivation. You look at any, professional athlete, they have overcome quite a bit of obstacles to get to where they are, because if they didn't, they may not have had the same motivation to be able to get there. So if you look at these things on the slide, they may not be too surprising. Maybe you've heard some of it before, but there is one thing that I really want to talk about that I think is probably something that you're definitely not aware of. And so this is when there's an underlying mental health concern, okay, that it can actually manifest as physical pain or injury or ailment, okay, when there may not actually be something physical in nature that's deriving the problem. Sometimes it starts off that way. So sometimes there can be an injury. Sometimes there can be something that is an actual trigger or mechanism for a pain source. However, some individuals that have an underlying health or mental health concern or mental health disorder can have an amplified pain response. And so what that means is if I gave you an example that smoke detectors are meant to detect if there's smoke in the fire to protect us, right? And so if we're in the kitchen, you're making some eggs, you get distracted for 2 seconds and then bam, they're burning, okay, and they're burned. So then there's smoke, right? And so that would maybe provoke your or your smoke detector in the hallway to go off. So this would be like you lit a match and blew it out. And then your smoke detector that's upstairs on the 3rd floor starts going off, okay? It's that type of thing. It's that type of response. It's like if I were to put my foot on a tack, I would feel pain because there's a physical source of pain. And then I remove my foot, then it should go away. The pain should go away. But with these individuals, with these adolescents, when they put their foot on their tack, they feel the pain, but then they remove their foot and they will still potentially have pain. So there is actually a pain processing disorder, and their pain and their sensitivity to pain is amplified. And so I do see this. I see this more and more where there's more of a root cause. There's more of a root issue going on that is manifesting as something more physical in nature when it actually isn't. And so the big take home is that you have to work on the inside in order to work on the outside.
I give an example of that too. So years ago, we had a house fire, lost our home, and for months afterwards, when I would smell a fire burning, could just be a campfire, it could be anything, a fireplace, I would get physically nauseous at the smell of that. I wasn't stressed or anxious, just it was an immediate physical reaction. Why? Because it was connected to an event. The flip side is I would be driving somewhere and I'd hear a fire engine go off and I'd feel anxiety. Why? Because it was a trigger. It reminded me of what had happened. You can see how that could be true with an athlete with an injury or something stressful, that it could be emotional. So Chrissy was just talking about how it could be physical reactions, but you can also see how emotional reaction can also trigger an athlete and create fear and make them want to withdraw, because the natural tendency is when we're anxious or afraid is to want to avoid the thing we're afraid of rather than press through it as well.
Absolutely. It just means that there's more to it, right? So, and sometimes I think as parents, that might be very difficult for you to really know or understand when there's something that's physically concerning versus not, as in terms of an injury. And I would say, that just comes down to communication. So I'm happy to always communicate, the situation or my assessment evaluation to kind of go through something like that and kind of walk through what recommendations would be at that point. So concussion. Okay. So concussion is a big one, and actually Julie had already mentioned about the statistics that increase your likelihood of having depression after having a concussion. And so there's definitely a lot of overlap here between concussion symptoms and some underlying mental health disorders, and that makes it very cloudy. So I will say that athletes that have an underlying mental health condition often tend to have delayed recovery time in their concussion. There is definitely something that is connected between, the concerns and the physical nature and the physical symptoms of the concussion. So it's something to just keep an eye on. It makes it kind of challenging at times, but It's certainly why concussion has been much more studied in recent years because of the severity and the nature of the lasting effects. This slide is, kind of cliche, right? You aren't just training your body, you're training your mind, but yet true. If you train your body to do hard things, you get really good at doing hard things. So just like you would exercise your legs and do strengthening and squats and leg extension exercises to be a really good soccer shooter, you're training your body physically, you still have to train your mind mentally, and we're gonna actually give you some tips on how to do that. So, how to utilize psychology to your advantage as an athlete. Okay, athletes, time to wake up. Self-awareness is huge. You need to know what motivates you, because motivation is not going to be there day in and day out, right? So it's more of the consistency and more of the reasons behind it to help. And so goals are super important. So every athlete should have goals. They should be written down because it leads to accountability. But they also you have to have grace with your goals. You have to have understanding that there's things that can change, and you might need to be flexible, and that doesn't mean you're giving up on them by any means. It just means that you're being flexible with being able to set realistic goals and be able to work to them, work hard to them, because nothing substitutes hard work. But you can have all the goals in the world, and if you don't have steps to get there and how you're going to achieve them, it's really for nothing, right? You have to have an understanding on really how you're going to get there. So the process to achieve those goals and be able to have them as a plan. So another thing that comes into play is energy management. So are you the athlete that needs to be hyped up? Are you like blasting music? Are you jumping up and down and like being all crazy? Or are you somebody who needs to just zero in and focus and kind of like be quiet in the moment, kind of laser into what you need to do? And knowing that is important, but if you're also the type of athlete that gets nervous or anxiety before a game, you have to understand that those symptoms of nervousness and anxiety are really the same as excitement. It's just how you classify it. So it's mindset in, trying to rephrase that and being like excited for versus nervous, anxious for. And so sometimes you need to actually ration your energy. So if you get too worked up, if you're too, anxious before a game and if anybody's ever had that or felt that, it really does zap your energy level. It really kind of wipes you out, and you're not going to have anything left to really go out there and perform. Kind of handling that, knowing and being aware is a good step to take. Self-talk, okay, seems like it should be obvious, but I hope you're not the athlete to yell at another teammate and say, oh man, you suck, what are you doing? I hope that's not the case, so you wouldn't say that to your teammate, so then don't say it to yourself, right? So you have to talk positively to yourself. So if you're a shooter, let's talk basketball, okay? If you're the shooter on the team, you're the three-point shooter, you start off the game and you're missing your shots. So what's going through your head? Okay, are you shooting and then are you saying, oh, I'm gonna miss it? Because guess what? If you're saying that to yourself, you probably will. So you need to rephrase that. You need to be more confident and get, when you're shooting, you're confident in your shot and you're telling yourself it's gonna go in. So, mind over matter. So routines. So routines and rituals are something that is a must. So I think every athlete should have some sort of pregame routine. And, I will say, some of our FCA athletes have some very interesting pregame routines, but I promised I would not divulge, and no judgments there. What happens in the weight room stays in the weight room, but we'll let that go. But at any rate, you should have some sort of pregame routine. It gets you in the right mindset for your game, for your competition. That is just a ritual, right?
Can I jump in there for a sec? What did you guys hear of the book Atomic Habits? It's a bestseller right now. I'm drawing a blank on the author's name, but I've actually read the book. He tells a lot of really fascinating stories about how that's true with athletes as well. So he gives an example of, I believe, a team from the Tour de France, and how he stepped in and helped develop some habits for the team, for the bikers, just simple things that you wouldn't even think of, like the kind of pillows they traveled with, and sleep schedules, routines like that, and how their performance actually went up significantly. And so it's really creative to even think whether you do that as a parent with your athlete or whether coaches do that, to say if there were some pre-game exercises or focusing activities or whatever it might be, how might that actually improve the skill level as well? That those two things are really foundational for helping have good habits with athletes.
You know, it might be a pregame meal. Might be, you know, a certain song, a playlist. Might be a verse. Like, everybody's different. Use what works. Find something. Get your mind set. That gets you, like, this is like the switch that you get to turn on and say, okay, it's game time, let's go, right? So the next one's reflection. And I will say that, and we have coaches in the room, and I will say our coaches here at FCA do a phenomenal job at this. They always take time after games. I've seen it time in and time out where they will have a pause and have reflection over the game and call out players that have done something really well and kind of focus on the positive. And it's really important to do that. And you know, I think they just do a phenomenal job. It doesn't mean that you just kind of ignore maybe things that need to be worked on. Because that's how we learn and that's how you grow, right? But it is a great tactic to use to stay kind of in a positive mindset with your team. And then the next couple we're going to go into a little bit more detail with, so focus and concentration and perfectionism. But just to end like with the good habits, both physically and emotionally, you know, all of these things take practice. Okay, it's not like you're going to just show up tomorrow and like put them all into play and be like really good at them. You know, it takes practice. So you do have to make a conscious effort of it, and it is something that you have to really think about beforehand and kind of, you know, maybe you have to go through step by step. Maybe you don't do all of them, but you kind of pick and choose. But it does take practice. So just like anything else you would practice to get better at, it's the same idea. So, you know, just like you would train your shot on net to improve your accuracy and your power, it's the same thing. You're trying to retrain your mindset to have more power. So the next slide is the start of focus and concentration. All right, so this is really important for athletes. So these two things go hand in hand. And as you can see, very simplistically, but if you have a lack of focus, how it drives the lack of confidence. And it literally is a vicious cycle. You have lack of focus, lack of confidence, and it goes hand in hand. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what can lead to a lack of focus. So the next slide has a couple, okay? And so, Julie, what would you say you feel might be the most factors involved in terms of what can lead to a lack of focus?
Well, I mean, Chrissy gave a good example, and I actually, just in the last 2 years, have counseled an athlete where they tore their ACL. I can't even talk tonight.
She's still in Switzerland.
I am. So, yeah, there was a tear. They were out for, what, good 6 months, would that have been?
At least,
yeah. High-level soccer. Two things were going on. One, confidence was shaken completely, and fear of going back in knowing that, yes, re-injury was possible. So the timidness, the tentativeness of even jumping back into playing soccer was really hard. The parents were having a hard time getting the athlete to go to practices for fear. But also there was a fear of not performing at the same level, all of the things that we just heard talked about. And there was also the expectations, what if I disappoint my parents? What if I disappoint my coaches? What if my teammates think less of me as a result and my career is over? And so that's a really good example of how it plays out in real time, and that's exactly why they came to counseling. It wasn't about anything else other than what do we do about this fear and this anxiety now of stepping back into a sport that they were once good at. So you see this over and over. So how parents respond is so key in this. To think through when can you and I as parents be part of the problem? Sometimes we are, but why But when we're thinking about it, we have to also know we're always the solution, that our ability to support our kids and encourage them and to say what they need to hear is going to be key as well. I forgot what you asked me. I went off on a tangent.
No, that was definitely good. Good answer. Good answer. All right. So, what can lead to a lack of confidence? Okay. So if we go on to the next slide there, Julie. And so here's a lot of what we see. And what I will say, believe it or not, right here, this slide is basically what our athletes' mindset is on a regular daily basis. Okay. So this, if you're not sure, this is a lot of the time what's going through their head. It's kind of a lot, right? It's kind of a lot. So fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of performance, fear of judgment, the pressures, okay? So pressure to be perfect, pressure of unrealistic expectations, self-pressure, coach pressure, parents pressure. So it's kind of a lot, right? So they have a lot going on in their mind and in their brain, and there's a lot to fear out there, right? But what I will say is, what is the most common phrase in the Bible? Anybody? Do not fear. That is correct. It is over 365 times is listed in the Bible. So it's almost like God's like, guys, remember, like constantly reminding us. And I think we need that, and it's obvious that we do. So it's there, it's written over and over. So do not fear. One thing that can never be underestimated is just the work that you put in. The work ethic will improve your confidence. Mathematically, if you give 100%, that's all you can do, right? That's it. So you can at least feel good about just being able to do 100%. So I'm going to talk about Isaiah 41, which is one of my favorites. But so it goes along with this, right? So do not fear, for I am with you. For do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. When we believe that God is with us, we can have the confidence that no matter what we face, no matter what the battle is, no matter what the obstacle is, that He is with us, time in and time out. And this alone, as a Christian athlete, can get you through anything that comes your way. You just have to truly believe it. You have to keep walking in faith, and do not fear.
Yeah, here's where faith is so important in sports, in a very unique way that we don't often think about. That the pressure is really all about the outcome. Well, it's about the performance too. But if we encourage a high level of performance, if we encourage a high work ethic, a good work ethic, if we encourage giving your best, doing your best, good character, then the outcome really doesn't matter. Well, of course it matters, right? That's what we say. But if we can teach our students that all you can do is give it your best, and then the control, really we hand over to God. And that's true across the board in our life, that all we're called is faithfulness to the task. God is in control of the outcome. And that gives a whole lot of relief in the midst of pressure, if you really believe that. If you really believe that my job is to do my absolute best, to give it all that I have, to be as faithful as I can in what I'm doing, and then I trust the Lord with the outcome. Think how freeing that really is. But it's letting go of the outcome and saying there is somebody who's in control and I don't have to be in control. But when we feel like we need to be in control of the outcome, it leads to all kinds of unhealthy ways of responding.
So I love this quote from Tim Tebow. Not needing the approval of others is a mark of confidence. Seek God's approval instead. It's pretty simple. Too much focus on ourselves. And I'm going to say, we do, there are athletes today that are very selfish. They're self-centered. And we need to get away from that. We need to get away from that mentality because, to be honest, if you take that pressure off of yourself and put it more on, how can I, as an athlete, help my team? It really takes away that pressure. And the things that lead to the pressure and the focus, because focus is a huge part of being an athlete. You need to be really good at focus if you want to be an elite athlete. And so what gets in the way of that and I know none of the parents here, they're the ones that didn't come tonight, but yelling in the stands at the officials or yelling at their student athlete, I see it firsthand, the demeanor of the athlete, their expression changes and their focus completely depletes and goes right to whatever is being said. It's like they are just, it's innate to listen, but I will say it does not help. It does take away their focus and their concentration on what they need to do as they step onto the court and they give everything 100% to their teammates and their coaches, and that's what they need to focus on, and nothing else. And so what I usually tell them, I've said this to a bunch of teams this year, in terms of being able to leave all the stuff behind you, and as you walk onto the court. And so I use the leave it all in the backpack analogy because it's something very tangible, where all that stuff that is going on in your head, all those fears, all those pressures, maybe you failed a test that day, maybe you had an argument with your best friend, maybe you broke up with a boyfriend, girlfriend, maybe you and your parents aren't getting along, whatever it is, it matters. I mean, it's your life, but as an athlete, you have to be able to separate that. You have to be able to put it in the backpack, zip it up, leave it in the locker room, and then for that hour or 2 hours that you have, you focus in on just what you need to do. And if you can do that, it's going to make a big difference. Now, again, it doesn't mean that those things don't matter. They do matter. But they will be there when you leave. They will be there when you're done with your game. Then they need to be managed and worked through, and hopefully you can get the help that you need if you can't do it alone. Nobody has to do any of that if they're alone. But it's a really, our field hockey team, is Jamie still here? Oh, there she is, yeah girl. She did something, so after I talked to field hockey this year in the fall, this was right before playoffs, and she did an awesome thing. She kind of piggybacked off this idea and had them, all of her field hockey, oh yeah, there's my field hockey girls, had them write down whatever that was weighing them down on an index card, and as they got off the bus, in the trash. It's like, it was a sign of like letting it go to God, giving it to God, at least, to take that pressure off their back. And you know what? They played an amazing game that day. That was pretty awesome. So it's freeing. It's something tangible. Be creative, just an idea. But as an athlete, you can do it yourself too. But it's athletes usually play the sport, right, because you love it, I hope. And so let the sport be the de-stressor instead of the stress creator, okay? All right, so perfectionism. How many of us in the room are perfectionists? Am I the only one? All right. Okay, so this can be a real good thing. It actually, the pressure, the internal pressure, can drive you, it can motivate you. And as I have said before, pressure creates diamonds. Pressure can be good if you utilize it right and if you manage the expectations right. You learn when you overcome things, right? And you become stronger. But the disadvantage is when it gets in the way. Okay, when you expect nothing less than perfect, and no one is perfect. Okay, no matter what you do, there's no such thing. There's no perfect practice to be perfect all the time. No one is perfect. Only Jesus is. And so take that pressure right off because you're going to make mistakes, right? And I think that's the big bold letters in the slide, is that accept mistakes are part of the game. And when you can accept that you will make mistakes, and when coaches can accept they will make mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes. Every time you make a mistake, you learn, you grow, you overcome it, and you get better, you get stronger. If you've never had any, well, that's impossible, but that's how you really can get to the next level. So you can utilize your mistakes, but being able to be okay with it is really important. And so rephrase, how can I help my team if I don't feel like my game is perfect? So, what can you do? So if you're the person on the basketball team that makes all the points, if you're the shooter, if you're the score person, right? You're like throwing up the big numbers, and your shot isn't what it normally is. So what do? All right, you focus on a different area of your game, right? You work on assists. You work on opening up your other players, your other teammates to get them the baskets. You work on your defense. There's always something that you can always do defense. No matter what's going on, you can always play good defense, right? So you just have to shift. So when something goes wrong in a game, if your head is still stuck on whatever the mistake was, 10 things just happen. So you have to be able to shift quick and move on. So trying to figure out what that is in whatever sport, whatever role you play, is important. But not setting up yourself for unrealistic expectations is also huge. Okay, and sometimes expectations need to be talked about, maybe or looked at by someone else, so you have a different perspective of what seems to be realistic. So I really encourage that coaches actually do this in the beginning of the year with their teams. You know, have expectations. You know, and maybe have them have expectations and kind of meet on what they would be. But as a coach, you probably have expectations on what you expect from your players each season. And I think it's really important for them to know what they are. Communication is really important here. So that's something that can help. So the last thing too on this side is positive reframing. So you can think of it like, I didn't achieve this, fill in the blank, with almost whatever it might be, but I did do this well. So again, positive mindset. And again, this all takes practice.
This is why this Michael Jordan quote is so
I love it.
good, isn't it?
I love
think
Michael
about
Jordan.
that. 25 times he was expected to take the game-winning shot and missed.
Perspective,
9,000 shots in his career he's missed. 300 games he's lost. And yet he says the key to his success was his ability to fail over and over again.
He was also
It's really
cut
profound.
from his 9th grade year, I believe,
Yeah.
from basketball.
Yep, something
And what
like that.
happened was his mom didn't move him to a different school to get on the team. She said, well, you better work harder. You better, do better, do more, put in the work. And he did. So we all know that story, how that ended, right? So sometimes, again, the obstacle or the failure really isn't a failure at all. It actually is what was the whole plan from the beginning to get you where you need to be. So mastering something takes repetition, not perfection, but training the mind is just as important as training the body. Our theme.
So again, here's a 30% of student athletes have reported feeling overwhelmed. Again, you're seeing themes we're trying to point to. And what does Cream say? You have to be able to center yourself, to let all your emotions go. Don't ever forget that you play with your soul as well as your body. So here you're even seeing, what we're trying to point to is how you're seeing high-level athletes also say that there's more to it than just a skill of a game. And your ability to navigate all those different elements is really going to be important. All right, prevention tips. Can we jump in there?
Sure. Okay. So tips. Everybody likes tips, right? We kind of can pull it all together and have the take home. So, tips for success. So if we had tips for coaches from what we talked about, one, communicate your expectations to your athletes during the preseason. Okay? I think this is a great idea to try to do. Communicate with PT or ATC. I'm a PT here. Most schools it would be ATC, but that's not me. I'm not a trainer. But or your counselors, and communicate with them if you see any red flags. Encourage routines as part of the pregame rituals. Continue post-game reflection to emphasize the positive. Establish an understanding that mistakes will be made, but how the athlete responds is really what matters. Awareness of limiting additional pressure placed on your athlete. And the last one, maybe the most important one, pray with your team.
Okay, another quote. For me, winning isn't something that happens suddenly on the field when the whistle blows and the crowds roar. Winning is something that builds physically and mentally every day that you train and every night that you dream. So again, just this repetition of what we do and how we respond to what's happening around us.
All right, so tips for athletes. It's a flashback picture. Some of you here are in the picture. All right, so for starters, I just want to say too, I'm not saying like athletes go all, zen and go home and go, and get all right with your mind. I'm not saying that, but if that works, hey, you can do that too. But some of these things are physically tangible things that you can actually try. So for starters, set realistic goals. Write them down, okay? Anybody in my class this semester learned how to do objective, reproducible goals. So if you need help with that, I'm happy to help you out with that. But manage your own expectations, okay? Manage our expectations. That's a big one. Accept mistakes and learn from them. It seems like obvious, but I feel like I really need to say that all the time. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. Understand your energy management. Okay, are you hyped? Are you gotta zone in, lock in? Establish those pre-game routines. Keep positive self-talk all the time. Get help when you feel like something isn't right. This is huge. You know yourself more than anybody. If something's not right, that's what we're here for. Okay, we're not here to judge. I mean, we've all been in situations. We know that you guys have a lot going on, and the point is that we want to help get you to the next level if that's what you want to achieve. And by doing that, if we can help you from the inside out, then that's what we're here for, okay? Practice working on your focus, okay? So again, that takes conscious effort. Reframing post-game reflection to, I need to work on this, but I did do this well to help my team, okay? Maintain perspective of yourself within the team. Know what your role is and be okay with that. If you're not sure what your role is, that's where coaches come into play. Help them figure that out. Like, what is their role? Okay, are they a leader? Are they a captain? Should they lead by their character? Or is it more of a physical position or, a role like that would be more on the field? And pray, but remember this. God never promised that there wouldn't be struggles in your life, but he did promise he'd be there with you to get you through all of them. Okay?
Just so you know, they're getting double vision behind you right now.
Oh. That's fine.
That one's a
Scan the
little better.
QR code, you'll be able to get them.
Oh yeah, tips for parents, I'll do that. All right, everything I'm saying is not rocket science, right? So be an encouragement, not a critic. But our kids need feedback. So of course we're gonna give feedback. Of course we're gonna help them understand how they can grow and navigate. But how do you do that in encouraging ways that build them up? Praying for your kids, telling them you're praying. I always joke that my prayer life increases every spring during baseball season. Probably not good, but it does for sure. But not just praying that my child will win, but praying for his character, praying for his focus, praying for him during it, and saying that to our kids, that I'm praying for you. Why? Because this is important to you, so it's important to me. And I want to see you thrive and succeed, and speaking those words to our young people. Help them see the way God has gifted, created them. Our kids are going to have strengths and weaknesses. They're going to be good at some things in sports. They're not going to be good at some things. They can grow, they can compensate. Being honest is really important, right? And so me being able to be honest about where there are weaknesses and needs to grow are just as important as encouraging them in their strengths as well. And we want our kids to have an accurate assessment of themselves. Not an overly embellished one or not a poor one, but an accurate one. Being realistic goes into that, fostering a positive attitude. We're not talking about that enough, but we need to be the role model to our young people about being positive, whether it's at a game, whether it's towards our coaches, whether it is towards the umps or the refs or whoever is playing the game right. That there's no reason to expect our young people to have godly character or good sportsmanship if the adults are not modeling that as well. And encouraging all those things. So again, one man practicing sportsmanship is better than 50 preaching it. So what's the takeaway? That we really need to model to our young people the way that we want them to act and be around us.
I will say too, my perspective of officials has changed since my 16-year-old has been officiating. So, yeah, I stick by it. But
Let me give you guys an example real quick. So there is a organization called positivecoach.org that says all of this stuff. They have really good resources too, things like how childhood stress affects self-regulation, how to help young people be able to self-regulate better. They have, which some of you students might not like this, contracts for student-athlete social media agreements, what is expected of their athletes on teams. They have a whole coach's guide on how to help high school athletes and deal with mental health issues as well. So there's tons of resources out there. We're just kind of giving you a brief survey of what's out there and knowing that there's lots of ways to take this to the next level as well.
so we just wanted to open up. We're pretty much finishing up. So if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer them. You can scan the QR code, and you could, get the link to be able to take a look at the slides that we just talked about and the resources. But we're very thankful for all you to come and listen and just kind of hopefully digest this information and be able to have an avenue on maybe how to handle the mindset of the athlete, because we know it's pretty complicated. Any questions?
Yeah, anything we didn't cover, any questions, any comments, of things you've noticed that we didn't share with the questions?
No, you don't get bonus points for this, Shane. So the question was, in wrestling specifically, how do you keep your spirits up, specifically when you're cutting weight?
Any coaches? Coaches, you can
Do
respond
we,
to this.
oh, there's no wrestling coaches, are there? Has anybody coached wrestling in here? You're not coaching, are you? Okay, well, are you going to answer your own
Watch
question?
the Rocky movies. They'll help you. Rocky movies. Watch the Rocky movies.
All right, well, okay, I have my own opinions about specifically cutting. I will leave them out. However, because that is a pretty hard physical and mental task, I would challenge you to not only write down your goals for why you're wrestling, right, or what you want to achieve with wrestling, and you can think about how to break those goals up. Like, you can have short-term goals and you can have long-term goals. So you might have like a preseason goal, mid-season, or end of the season goal. So if you have goals written down, right, that you want to achieve, that's something that's written where you can refer to when you feel less motivation. And that can actually help to drive the motivation to get through those tougher periods where you might need to cut weight.
That's really where it is about mental toughness comes in too, right? To say, I am working hard to get to this goal, and how do I push through the hardest moments to get there, knowing that there's a reward on the other side? And how do I do it wisely? And so admitting something's hard or challenging isn't the problem, it's the commitment to get through it.
Any other questions? Athletes? Coaches? Yes, bro.
I know a lot of people talk about visualization and actually visualizing success prior to stepping onto the field, visualizing your role, your responsibility prior to getting on the field. Have you found resources where there are exercises that we could take our athletes through visualization leading up to a specific event or specific competition?
So he had said that are there resources that will specifically help with visualization before an event, like, tips on how to do that. I don't know any specifically, but I'm sure if you look them, I'm sure if you Google search that would be probably something pretty easy to find. But I think that's a great idea. I think visualization Part of visualization is making sure that when you're visualizing like step by step, going through, the technical detail of whatever role they are on the team, and, doing it correctly and succeeding through that. And so you're kind of just mentally, it's almost another way to just focus as well. So it's a great pregame way to focus as well.
Yeah, I'm not familiar specific with sports, but I've listened to a lot of programs that talk about that. And you're right, it's another way of almost a skill you're developing to get through it. And so they're certainly out there. And the question is taking some of those principles and applying them to what you do in the coaching.
Any other questions? Yes. The Art of Mental Toughness is a book to recommend. I have not read, but has suggestions as well.
A lot of things. I don't know if the Atomic Habits book does this, but a lot of people that talk about building success talk about visualization and the way that you work through what you're going to do with your day, or how you're going to get through a tough meeting, or how you're going to work through certain obstacles that you're overcoming. So that principle is just there throughout a lot of different themes and careers.
Any comments from athletes that have either tried some techniques on their own or have things that they know has worked well for them that they're willing to share? Everybody's shy all of a sudden. Shane's not shy.
Anything any coaches want to add? You guys are there in the thick of it.
How many of you, I know most of the athletes are sitting up there, how many of you have a pregame routine? Okay. So that's we gotta work on that. Anything else? Questions? Yes.
So let's say hypothetically you get done with the game, and as a coach, there wasn't many positive things to talk about because it was bad. Now, here, not too often, but sometimes you're like really struggling to find something that you could sandwich in there. Maybe some areas to focus on when that's the case. And
Their character, maybe their character and how they're, their demeanor and their character and getting through it. Hopefully that's good.
Maybe pray and wait till the next day to have the meeting.
maybe
Or-
short discussion.
Or maybe
Right.
just honesty, right?
Not
Honesty and just prayer, because I think there are definitely games we've all been through where you just need it to end. So sometimes, sometimes you just have to leave it to God and pray about it.
Sleep on it so something brilliant will come before the next morning.
Anyone else?
All right,
So-
if you guys have any questions, come on up afterwards.
And please feel free to grab a snack or a drink on your way up. All right, thanks so much, guys.
All right, thanks for coming.